Back here, announcers on Boog, Sciambi, and Dave Sims, and delighted to be joined by the voice of the Cleveland Indians, Tom Hamilton. What's going on, Hammy? How are you?
Great, guys. Good to see some friendly faces and to get caught up. I think all of us need to fire our financial advisors, though, because nobody recommended investing in Zoom back in January, did they?
This is a fair point. I mean, the amount of Zooming, at least I've been doing, I don't know what's been keeping you occupied. Obviously, staying safe is top.
Yeah.
But what's been keeping you occupied?
Well, when you have 4 children and they're spread out from Seattle to Atlanta to Minnesota to Columbus, we spend a lot of the time on Zoom. You know, as parents, you never stop worrying, but they're all doing well, and we just know how fortunate and how grateful we are, considering what is going on elsewhere. So we've been blessed so far, and I think if nothing else, hopefully this is helping people reconnect. And I don't think we need these kind of things to keep perspective, because if you do, then you probably are kind of a hopeless case anyway. But I hope, if nothing else, it makes us appreciate maybe all the little things a little bit more. Like a roll of toilet paper.
Hope you weren't hoarding. Boog and I have been talking about this the last week and change about what, and asking guys what they've been doing. I mean, so you got the family. What's your baseball Jones? I mean, have you been looking at stuff, researching, going back for laughs, looking at old stuff, reviewing last season, the World Series from a couple of years ago? What kind of stuff have you been doing in that regard?
Yeah, you try to keep up on everything, although there isn't much to keep up on right now. And luckily I had enough time in spring training to get prepared for the season. So, I'm like everybody else. You're reading every story you can. I mean, you wonder what in the world would we have done without the internet, if we didn't have that right now. And, you kind of read every story that's out there. You're hoping for some kind of normalcy, whatever that is. All of us would love to get back to baseball. We know that's not the most important thing right now, but I think some of the stories that we've seen, whether they're trial balloons or been stories leaked for a reason, it certainly is intriguing, and it gets you thinking. And then being a Wisconsinite, I've never been more prepared for the NFL draft in my life. So if the Packers don't get a wide receiver this year, I may start to like the Browns. So,
hey, speaking of that, so you grew up in Wisconsin. Give me your baseball roots, your team, your guys. What was your baseball hook as a kid?
Well, okay, so now you're going to know how old I am, but you guys know that anyway. So, once we rode the horses back from school to the farm that I was born on, we were dairy farmers, and, literally I was listening to Earl, Gillespie, and Blaine Walsh and those great Milwaukee Braves teams. And, they had moved to Milwaukee prior to my being born, but I remembered them when I was, kindergarten, first, second grade in the 60s, and Hank Aaron and Eddie Matthews and Joe Adcock, Joe Torre. They had some Warren Spahn and Lou Burdett. Anyway, that was how I got hooked, and it was Earl Gillespie doing the games. And, I think, too, when you're anybody that's out there that grew up on a farm, you have a vivid imagination to get through some of the days, because your next door neighbor's a mile away. And one thing you learn is every cow's rear end looks alike. So there aren't a lot of people there to talk to. So I think that was, that to me seemed like Camelot, guys. It was like, can you imagine being, first off, when we moved to Waterloo, a half hour outside of Madison, that was a town of not even 2,000. We thought we had landed in New York City, compared to, living on a farm with that isolation. And I'm not complaining, but I think that's where the love for me came. And then, for me, one of the highlights of my career is I got to do University of Wisconsin football with Earl Gillespie. And it was like, that would be like, I think, for a kid today saying, I got to work with Vin Scully. That Earl Gillespie meant that much to me as a kid growing up. and was one of the finest human beings and an incredible baseball announcer. He'd be in baseball's Hall of Fame, except he did not want to move to Atlanta when the Braves, left and went to Atlanta in the mid-'60s. So, that's where it started for me, and wanted to play ball like everybody else. But, when you have high school coaches saying, any chance you could go out for tennis, you probably realize the major leagues aren't going to be in your future.
How about your first big break in baseball, first broadcasting gig doing baseball?
Gosh, in addition to doing high school and Legion ball and everything else, working up the ladder, started to do some A-ball games when I was in Appleton. And at that time, it was the Appleton Foxes. They were the single-A club of the Chicago White Sox. They had this young front office executive who was learning at the knee of Roland Heeman named Dave Dombrowski, who would come to Appleton. And, my first team had Ron Kittle and Greg Walker on it, and Britt Burns, and, Vaughn Hayes was in Waterloo, Iowa. And, those were the stars of that league. And so, just getting a chance to do A-ball. But for me, the best thing was going to Columbus and getting a chance to do AAA baseball. At that time, the Yankees farm team back in the late 80s.
And then you got your first gig with the Indians, was it 90?
Yeah, 1990. And again, we all know how lucky and blessed we are to have these jobs. And I was fortuitous from the standpoint I was from the Midwest.
Right.
The Indians were going through a lot of partners with Herb. Not that it was Herb's fault. It wasn't. But they were guys that looked at Cleveland as a stepping stone. Yeah. And, they wanted to get that major league job and then maybe move to the West Coast or wherever they were from. And they were tired of that because there was no continuity, and it was hard for, Herb, I would think. And so being from the Midwest, my wife being from Pittsburgh, for us, Cleveland was Camelot. That was the top of the mountain. And, again, how lucky you are to get these jobs. But getting here for us was like, we don't have any interest in going anywhere else. So you have to get lucky that way too. I mean, if they didn't care where you were from, there's probably a pretty good chance you wouldn't be talking to me now.
Yes. Hey, the remnants of 2016, I mean, you got so close to winning the World Series. It would have been the first since 48, Satchel Paige, Bob Feller, Lou Boudreau, and that whole crew. But give us a little thumbnail of, even more than a thumbnail of what 2016 meant to Cleveland and the region up around Lake Erie.
First, I think it was one of the greatest World Series we could have had for baseball, because I think it captured the nation in that you had two franchises that, the woe is me. One hadn't won since 1908, and the other one since 1948. Original franchises in baseball. There were so many storylines there. The Cubs were an incredibly talented club. And quite honestly, guys, we thought, I'm not saying the players are Tito, but maybe those of us as broadcasters or even other people with the organization were like, look, it's been a great year, but you can't lose Danny Salazar and Carlos Carrasco out of your rotation going into postseason, and then have Trevor Bauer nearly sever, a couple of fingers off. And so to be down to, in essence, Trevor Bauer, people forget, started game one of the division series, not Corey Kluber. Started game one because they felt like if it went 5 games, the game one starter comes back for game 4 on short rest. The game 2 starter, Corey Kluber, would have his full 4 days off, be ready for game 5. Bauer was dominant in game 1, but that was the last time he was really effective because then he started playing with his drone. So to be down to Corey Kluber and Josh Tomlin and think you're going to get through those teams in the American League, much less the Cubs, was remarkable. We had a 3 games to 1 lead, but that club just, they ran out of gas pitching wise. Plus the Cubs were really good. And you can't take anything away from the Cubs, but game 7 to to have Rajay Davis do that against Aroldis, you guys know what he did against. It's, to me, the greatest moment in the history of our ballpark. The most electrifying moment. As many people as we had in the park, we probably had that many on the plaza between the Cavs arena and the ballpark. And when you see those video shots that the great camera people had, the wave of emotion, because you had so many people, for instance, guys, Burke Lakefront Airport, which is off Lake Erie, is where all the private jets come in. They didn't have room for any more private jets because of all the people that had come in from around not only the country, the world, on private jets to see Game 7. And a lot of those were Cub fans, and those kids didn't get Christmas gifts because mom and dad had spent it on tickets. But I just thought, it was great for the city. But I thought more importantly, guys, I know people here are disappointed, but I'll take that 8th inning at bat by Rajay Davis to my grave. You don't win, but do you ever get a chance to see many moments like that in sports?
You're a high energy guy, and if I remember correctly, Boog, you can vouch for this. That was a great call at Tommy put on that home run.
Thank you. I didn't feel that. I was battling laryngitis the whole World Series, and you're just trying to, for once in my life, stay under control, and wasn't able to on that call, and kind of lost my voice on it. And you know how that is. Those of us in this profession, when you start dealing with voice issues, you're like, dear God, please let me get through this ball game. But I appreciate it. But I just love seeing the video of that home run and the reaction of the crowd. But to see our guys leaping over the railing of the dugout like they're Little League kids. And it only tied the game, and I think all of us have been in the game to know long enough. The Indians had to win that game in the 8th inning. Obviously, the rain played a big part of it. But, boy, you gotta get it right then and there. And, and only in baseball could the end of the game, in the 7th game of the World Series, come down to Mike Montgomery facing Michael Martinez. Two guys that, would you have ever thought of them in Game 7 for the last at-bat of a game?
Yeah, it's crazy. Rewind a little bit, though, and take me through kind of the start of this version of Indians baseball and the transition from the old park to the new park. The Browns were gone for a little bit. You guys had that sellout streak of almost 500 or so home games, something in that range. What was that like? Like from when you first got there, and obviously you're excited to be in the big leagues, but you're in the old park, and that place was giant and
a dump.
Yeah. A dump. So, and then you get good. You know what I mean? So and your team, you had all these young guys, but the transition of moving from one park, a dump, to a really nice park, and your team got better as well.
Yeah, you know what, John and David, it was kind of the perfect storm. And I don't think the club and the cities ever got credit for it. Do you know how many other franchises got a new park because of what happened here? Because a lot of organizations sold the idea of a new ballpark, meaning it'll be a renaissance period for us too. It'll be just like the Indians. They got to a new ballpark and they became one of the most electrifying teams that any of us had seen from an offensive standpoint there for about a 5-year period. It doesn't usually happen that way. It did for the Indians. Yeah, they planned it. They did a great job player development. They did a phenomenal job in adding Dennis Martinez, Earl Hershiser, Eddie Murray. When those three guys came, guys, that's when you knew things had changed. They wouldn't have even returned a phone call from the Indians in '93, but with the new ballpark and with that young talent that people could see emerging, that kind of put us over the top. And again, it became the perfect storm, because very seldom what you try to put on paper comes to fruition. It just doesn't always come together like that. And look how many other organizations got brand new ballparks and it never did anything. Because the other thing too, I don't think Hank Peters, John Hart, and Danny O'Dowd got enough credit for. It started with the trade of Joe Carter back in the late 80s. Their only star and guy that I think is a borderline Hall of Famer. and went on to have an incredible career, especially with Toronto. But trading him for Sandy Alomar and Chris James and Carlos Baerga, nobody knew who those guys were. But then even in 91, when we lost 105 games, a club record, they never deviated from the plan. And when things go bad, it's real easy to say, oh, to hell with the plan. Let's try a new plan. And that's where clubs get into trouble. And so, just walking into that park in 94 for the first time, you're like, it's almost like the first time you saw color television. And again, I'm dating myself.
Sure.
But you were like, huh?
Yeah.
This is a ballpark and it's here? And to see it being built on a parking lot, at the time you were like, there's no way this will be any good. And, it's still, I think, selfishly one of the better parks in baseball. Opening day is Randy Johnson in Seattle, and he's got a no-hitter until, I believe, the 8th inning. And there's only been one pitcher in the history of baseball to throw an opening day no-hitter. That's Bob Feller. And he is pacing the hallways like an expectant father at the hospital, basically saying, if somebody doesn't get a hit, I'm going down there and grabbing a bat. And Sandy Alomar gets a hit. We win in extra innings on a Wayne Kirby walk-off base hit. And it was almost like, this is unbelievable that this fairy tale is becoming a reality. And then it led to arguably one of the most, guys, if you think, and again, this is a credit to what they did, you as an organization and a farm system drafted and developed Albert Bell, Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, Richie Sexson, Brian Giles, Sean Casey, all at roughly the same time, which is why some of those guys got traded and became stars once they got traded and got a chance to play. That's an awful lot of near or Hall of Fame talent at one time. And that's why I don't think we'll ever see it replicated here again. The 465 sellouts was, I think, a byproduct of what you guys mentioned. The Browns left. You finally were in a facility that was conducive to watching baseball. And for the first time in 40 years, you were still in the pennant race before the 4th of July came. And
that's the truth.
And so it just was, and I thought it was also because of how the city was portrayed. You were on national television so much. Because of all of that, the late night jokes stopped about the city of Cleveland. And I think they had a lot to do with the image changing in the city and how people that live here felt about themselves.
Yeah. Tell me, what kind of club do you think you have, or did you think you had in spring training coming into here the 2020 season?
I think, Dave, it was a playoff contender, but with very little margin for error. And by that, I mean injuries. The club won 93 games last year and didn't make the playoffs.
Right.
And I think that kind of got overlooked from the standpoint of how many injuries that club had to overcome. You didn't have Corey Kluber and Carlos Carrasco basically all year. And so because of the starting pitching, had they stayed healthy, now Clevenger and Carrasco were banged up in spring. They're obviously healthy now. The rotation keeps you in a game every night. And you've got enough offense, but you can't afford Frankie Lindor or Jose Ramirez to get hurt. I think Franmil Reyes is on the verge of becoming a star, a 40-homer guy with that big bat that, everybody's looking for. I think it was definitely a playoff contender because I don't think anybody in the division got that much better pitching-wise. White Sox were going to be a factor, but I think, guys, were they 20 games behind the Indians a year ago? That's not the Twins. I don't. That's a lot of games to make up, but they were going to be really good. Minnesota's really good. So, the old adage, if you go to spring training with a chance to play in October, I think that's what you hope for, and you see how it unveils itself. Problem now, guys, is, we all know Frankie Lindor is a free agent at the end of 2021. We all know Frankie Lindor is going to play somewhere else, if not sooner, in 2022. Not because the Indians don't want him, not because they won't pay him, but can you pay one player in a market this size $35 million a year and then be competitive and build a club around it? You can't.
Can't do it. Last word, Boog. Go ahead.
what do you got for the rest of the day? What's going on? What's going on the rest of today?
You know, my wife has taught me to push a really mean vacuum.
Yes.
So it's cleaning day here. Let's see. Then I have a kind of like with you folks, we're doing a Zoom teleconference for an hour with Tito, which with Tito it could be 5 hours. As you guys
say
know.
hello. Oh, that'll be fun.
We're hoping he's out of his bathroom too. So
tell him to clean it up. No food stains on the shirt. Let's go.
But no, you know, just it's just you're so grateful to be healthy and know that we haven't been touched like some people.
The trend, by the way, in the internet world, guys, is for announcers, and Joe Buck's done it, and the guy who does I think he does rugby over in England, calling play-by-play of mundane things. And Tom Hamilton is who I want to hear. If there's if my person to follow me around my apartment and call play-by-play is not me, it's you.
Oh, thank you.
That's what I want.
That's very kind. My wife says, why don't you practice the play-by-play? Go clean up the dog poop in the backyard.
Stay hot.
Yeah.
You probably could make that happen, too. You could make that live, Tom. Hey, man. Hey, thanks so much. Man. And thanks for joining us. And, again, you stay healthy. All the best. Say hello to Tito for us and say hello to your wife.
You bet. Dave, John, great talking to you. Be safe, guys. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
All right. The great Tom Hamilton for Boog, Sciambi. I'm Dave Sims. That is AnnouncersON. See you next time.